is a joyous time.
All right,
He's
lights are
on
up.
earth.
We are ready to go. Hey, how are you, Tom?
Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. We have a guest tonight on Monkey Time. Welcome to Monkey Time. It's a live call-in cable access show. We're on for a half hour, and our phone number is going to be put up during the show. You can feel free to call. We have back with us, let's see, your last visit was in July, I think.
Yep.
Tom Jensen, who's the director of public policy polling. And you were called by one study, the most accurate polling company in the United States when it came to the election results last November.
Yep.
You must be very proud.
We are, absolutely.
Well, you got a lot of flack. You got a lot of flack from people in the run-up. And some people are saying that you are, I mean, Nate Silver's getting a lot of the press, but one of the people that praised you so heavily was pointing out, and I think it was the Fordham University study, or maybe it was Business Insider, when you did an interview with Business Insider, they said that Nate Silver just collects poll results from a number of companies, but you were even more accurate than him, and you're just one of those polling companies that he collects data from. So is that fair to say? Can you talk smack about Nate Silver a little bit here?
Well, I think PPP and Nate both had a really good election, and of course part of the reason Nate had a really good election was because our polls were accurate, so when he was feeding those into his model, it made his model more accurate. A couple key things, for instance, the closest state in the country was Florida, and our last couple polls before the election both had Obama up by a point in Florida. He won Florida by a point. There were other polls that showed Romney up by as much as 6 points. So that was a situation where it was probably good for Nate's model that we polled that a couple times in the last election, had those polls in Florida showing Obama up that were part of his mix.
And one of the things that may not be clear for folks watching at home who don't follow the polling stuff very closely is that it's your assumptions about the electorate.
Absolutely.
It's not just the numbers and how you do the calling and all that, although that's part of it.
Sure.
But your assumptions about who a likely voter is going to be. Can you quickly just give us one or two things that you did that made your model much more accurate than many of the other polling companies' model?
The main thing that we got right was we just anticipated that the 2012 electorate would look very similar to the 2008 electorate, that record turnout from African Americans, young voters, Hispanics that launched Obama into the White House in 2008, that those folks would come back out in 2012. And a lot of the polls that sort of weren't as accurate on the election were saying there's no way the enthusiasm for Obama will be what it was last time. There's no way all those people came out again. It's going to be a much more Republican electorate. And what it turned out was that it was really almost an identical electorate to last time around. It was actually even more racially diverse this time than it had been in 2008.
And that was just their gut. They just looked at they read the papers, they saw things, and they decided that that Obama didn't, the enthusiasm wasn't there.
Yeah.
As opposed to going with what people were telling.
Yeah, I mean, I think one really key thing that we found in our polling all year, all the way from January, we asked a question every couple weeks on one of our national polls: how excited are you about voting in the election this year? Every single one of those polls we did all year, the single group most excited about turning out to vote in November was African Americans. So there was just no reason to think, when African Americans were more excited about any other group about voting, that they wouldn't turn out at least in the same numbers that they did in 2008. And that really was the key thing for us, even particularly in a state like North Carolina. Even though Obama didn't win in the end, there was this year-long debate: is North Carolina a swing state or not? And I think most people thought it really wasn't a swing state, that it wasn't going to be close. Of course, it ended up as the second closest state in the country, and the reason for that is that
North Carolina was for Romney, and the second closest state in the country.
The only state closer than North Carolina was Florida. Obama won Florida by 1. Romney won North Carolina by 2. Third closest state was Ohio, which Obama ended up winning by 3. I really think that we're a swing state to stay. This is the second election in a row that we've been the second closest state in the country.
Wow. Once again, I have to say, Rob Christensen, are you paying attention? Because, because the way it's being painted is North Carolina just went very conservative, across the board. And there were a number of specific reasons for that. A very weak gubernatorial candidate. That was a shame. But anyway, I'm diverging as I usually do. Let me get back to the election, because there have been a number of theories thrown around. Romney, in particular, is well known for some of his ridiculous theories. But the Latino vote, some people say that the gay vote was a significant contribution as well, and that there was a huge margin there for Obama, and of a couple million voters, which is a significant chunk of his popular margin. But then there are other people saying that it was a wide variety of other things, the economic fundamentals and all. What do you think are the biggest, the most likely explanations for why Obama won?
I think the biggest factor is who turned out, that it was a situation where Democratic-friendly demographics who sometimes vote and sometimes don't vote came out in big numbers. That was probably the biggest thing. Second biggest thing, though, was Mitt Romney just never really making a strong case about why he should become president. Obviously, a very negative campaign towards President Obama, but I don't think Romney ever successfully made the case that he actually would have done any better or would do any better moving forward. And I think that voters at least are starting to feel a little bit like the economy's turning around. Certainly not that it's back, but I think there was a feeling increasingly in the closing days of the election that Obama had made the argument that things at least were headed back on the right track and that his leadership had helped to make that happen. I think it really is a time for a lot of soul searching by the Republican Party because they're very strong with straight white males, and that is the segment of the electorate that is shrinking the most in terms of what percentage it comprises. And
I'm doing my part, Carol, on the straight part. Got to convert them.
And
for the country.
And all the groups that are really increasing in sort of their share of the electorate are a lot more Democratic friendly.
Romney lost the Asian American vote by a huge, almost as huge a proportion as he lost the Latino vote.
Yeah, and
that was a surprise to me.
Yeah.
Was that a surprise to you? Or?
It's honestly something I hadn't given much of a thought to because we don't really talk about the Asian vote, but we probably should be a little bit more because that is growing just as the Latino vote is. And
it's hugely Democratic at this
absolutely.
point. Huh. Well, yeah, I thought that was interesting. So can you tell me about how you determined a likely voter? Can you, in your polls, can you just mention that briefly? Because you did it very differently from Rasmussen, say, who also is the other automated polling company.
We just call people up and we say, this is a short survey about the presidential election. If you don't plan to vote in the presidential election, please hang up now.
And this is a robot?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the entire likely voter screen.
That's it?
You don't need a PhD from Harvard to come up with that, but I'll tell you who has a really fancy schmancy voter screen is Gallup. Gallup asks 10 questions to determine if you're a likely voter or not, and their super fancy Ivy League educated likely voter model said all year that Mitt Romney was going to be elected president. Our bachelor's from Carolina likely voter model said just hang up, and as long as you don't hang up, you're a likely voter. Sometimes in polling, the simple way is the best way. You just don't need to make it overcomplicated. If people tell you they're going to vote, they're usually going to vote. You don't need to screen them out with all these weird questions about if they know where their polling place is and that kind of thing. A lot of people you're going to call up in June, 3 months or 5 months before the election.
They don't know where
they're not going to know where their polling place is, but it doesn't mean they're not going to vote. And a lot of these sort of old school likely voter models, I really think are overcomplicated.
Do they? I also read that they. That you do your polling over multiple nights, and that makes a difference. Why does that make a difference? Because you don't just do all your polling, all your automatic calls in one night.
Yeah, for whatever reason.
Or human calls.
Yeah,
whatever.
For whatever reason, it tends to be harder to reach African Americans, Hispanics, young people, the demographic groups that tend to be more supportive of Democratic candidates. A lot of the time, if you're going to reach folks within those demographic groups, it takes 4 or 5 phone calls. You got to call them over a period of several days. Rasmussen in particular, they'll do their entire poll between 7 and 9 on a Wednesday night. So I don't really see that as a poll of the electorate as a whole. I see it as a poll of people who are home between 7 and 9 on Wednesday night. And the way we do our polling, we're really trying to accommodate people with different schedules who might be at home at different times. It's a particularly big thing in a state, for instance, like Nevada, where there's really 3 shifts. I mean, you have people who are working from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the casinos or whatever, and you have to call at a wider variety of times if you're going to have any hope of reaching those people.
And you do that.
Yeah.
So are some of these other companies changing their models in the light of your success, do you think?
It'll be interesting to see. I think.
Have you changed your model? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You think that what?
I think that certainly I know that if we had had a situation where we got a bunch of states wrong in the election and that kind of thing, we would be really reevaluating our methods and making some changes. Rasmussen, for instance, I don't know if they're doing that or not because they got the 2010 election wrong and then they didn't really change anything and got the 2012 election wrong too. But different polling companies have different motivations. They're sort of the Fox News pollster, so Fox News may not care that they got it wrong. As long as they're putting out polls that make Republicans feel good, they may be doing their job.
Speaking of feeling good, you were saying that earlier before we went on the air that when the polls were showing after the first debate Obama was going down, you were reporting this fact that Obama was not doing as well in the polls, and Democrats were giving you crap.
Yeah, I mean, definitely one thing that we really learned from this election, I think this is something that's sort of particularly true in the Twitter age. People are more wired into polls than they've ever been before, and it's easy for them to get in touch with pollsters. If somebody doesn't like something that we put out, it's not very hard to get in touch with us and let us know about it, be that through Twitter, email, 25 voicemails in the middle of the night from Ron Paul supporters, which happened once this cycle.
Oh boy, what fun. They're so inappropriate. Maybe there's something about their inappropriateness that's just funny to me.
No, well, I've learned to just go to sleep with my work cell phone on silent, because if they're mad at you, they'll just call you in the middle of the night. That's a good way to get revenge. But so even though we're a progressive polling company, what we found during that 2 or 3 week period in October where Obama wasn't doing that well was that progressives were just as willing to turn on us as conservatives had been all year when we were showing some news that wasn't as good for President Obama.
That's so ridiculous.
Yeah, we were getting some pretty good flack. So I'm glad it worked out in the end. And we've actually had a couple of people like email us or tweet us or whatever and say, we're sorry that we kind of got ugly during that period when Obama wasn't doing so well. We should have just trusted that she knew what you're doing, and we appreciate that. But that's just a big part of the territory now. Is,
you have to have a thick skin, and you've been quoted in some of the interviews saying that we try not to pay too close attention to what the bad things people say about us.
We actually pay very close attention to it. To some extent, we enjoy it. Some of the criticism. When Dick Morris is on Fox News ranting about how much he hates your polling company, we get a kick out of that. That's what we consider good publicity. Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson got mad at us at one point. We did a poll about them, and we found that nobody had ever heard of them before. And it really hurt their feelings. I think if we had found that people...
Whether you liked them or not, and then the vast majority of the responses were, I don't know.
So I think if we had found that people hated them, they might have been okay with that, but 80% of people have never heard of Tucker Carlson. That hurt their feelings. So Hannity had Carlson on his radio show to sit there and talk about how mean PPP was and how we hurt their feelings and that kind of stuff. That was one of my best days of the whole election. It's like, if you're making those people mad, I'll take that any day.
Well, you have this punk reputation. You actually were quoted. I've got a direct quote from you. If somebody takes a shot at us, we're going to take a shot at them. Do you remember that quote?
Yeah, no. I mean,
what was that in relation to?
That was basically these conservative media types who, try to fight with us on Twitter or, write mean articles about us or stuff like that.
In small outlets like the Washington Post.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're just not going to go cry in the corner because of that.
You fire back on Twitter and you call them idiots. And,
I mean, if they are. This woman from the Washington Post, Jennifer Rubin, wanted to, write this really conspiratorial article about how we were asking these loaded poll questions and how we were trying to hide them from the public. So, I called her back and I talked to her, and then as soon as I got off the phone with her, the poll questions she was talking about, I just posted them on Twitter and said, "Boogie woogie, here's the poll questions Jennifer Rubin thinks we're trying to hide from you." And it kind of killed her story. And I think we're adept at sort of dealing with this new media landscape.
Well, that was the poll where you were asking, do you think Obama hates white people?
Yeah.
And then the answer was mostly no. And then the next question was, and this was at the end of your poll.
Oh, yeah.
So it didn't skew the results too much. But the next question was,
do you think the conservative media wants you to think that Barack Obama hates white people?
That's a great question.
They roll out this 5-year-old video a month before the election and try to turn that into the big new thing.
Yeah. And it
was totally about race. No, it didn't work, but that was totally the motivation. They knew they were going to get blown out with African Americans, knew they were going to get blown out with Hispanics. Republicans knew the only way they were going to win this election was to win the white vote by 25 points. Romney really never got to that point, but I think a lot of the folks in the conservative media down the stretch thought well, we need to stir up some racial tensions in order to try to win this election.
That was the only way that he could do it.
And you know, it's reassuring that that really bombed the way that it did. I think that
it was close, though.
Yeah, it was close.
Yeah.
But something like that maybe would have worked a generation ago. Unfortunately, we saw in the Harvey Gantt, Jesse Helms races that something like that worked in this state 20 years ago. But I think those sorts of tactics are becoming less and less effective. I think we have a more sophisticated electorate, an electorate that's going to be less likely to respond positively to these kinds of cynical tactics that the Republicans sometimes use.
These campaign events, the 47% thing, and then just, you know, the chair thing, the empty chair thing, they get talked about a lot. But do they have much of a lasting impact? These new ads that come out and get the talking heads go crazy about, how much of an impact do these day-to-day ups and downs of the campaign have?
Very little of the day-to-day ups and downs of the campaign matter. Most of those things that the Fox News's and MSNBC's of the world get obsessed about for a day, if we poll and ask average people what they think about them, 80% of people don't even know that happened. I'll tell you the one thing that I think really did matter, though, was the 47% video. I think that had so much permeation. It was talked about for so long. The Obama campaign made good ads built up around it. And I think that came out at a time when people maybe were starting to warm up a little bit more to Mitt Romney, say, you know, he actually is a decent guy. He's not as cold as we thought. And that sort of stopped that momentum right in its tracks. And people were like, oh, that guy actually is a jerk. I was starting to think maybe he wasn't a jerk, but yeah, he is a jerk. And I think that really, you went into the conventions and Obama was up by about 2 or 3 points in most of the swing states. After the conventions, after 47%, Obama was all of a sudden up by 5 or 6 points in most of the swing states. And even though Romney got some momentum in the last month after he won that first debate, he had gotten himself too far behind.
Yeah. He was just not a very likable man. So I asked this before, but I had interrupted you. Have you made any refinements or changes to your model since the results? Because North Carolina was the state that you were off most in. Is that not fair to say? Your home state? You were close.
We were off by 1.5 points.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Within the margin of error.
Oh, yeah. What we're going to do, our big project for the next cycle is trying to find a good way to incorporate cell phone users into our surveys. Because we do automated calls, we can't actually call cell phone users. That's just the law, and I wish it wasn't the law, but it is.
Well, cell phone users don't want that law to change, I'm sure.
No, I know.
Because that means if you get the right to do it, then all the telemarketers get the right to do it too.
Well,
right?
They could just give pollsters the right to do it. For instance, we don't have to abide by the do not call list, and that's something where pollsters have an exemption and telemarketers at least aren't supposed to it.
So you think politicians are eventually going to do that, give pollsters that exemption for cell phones?
No, but I wish they would. So we're looking into ways of interviewing cell phone users potentially through the internet, potentially through text messages, that kind of thing.
Can you buy lists of cell phone users from the cell phone companies?
You can.
Yeah, you can. That's pretty easy.
It's just a question. Excuse me. The question of figuring out the best way to sort of integrate those people into the surveys and that kind of thing.
So it's representative.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Huh. So there's some good news that you posted on the blog. By the way, we're talking with Tom Jensen, who's the director of public policy polling, which is, I think it's fair to say, currently the most accurate polling organization private company in the United States right now, at least based on the results of the last election. They're based here in Raleigh, and they didn't exist 8 years ago. Is that fair to say? And now you've come to the top of the heap. That's just wonderful. And you blog at publicpolicypolling.com.
That's right.
You posted some good, interesting news on same-sex marriage today. Can you talk about that?
Well, of course, the November election, in addition to being good for President Obama, was very good for proponents of same-sex marriage. Washington voters, Maryland, Maine all legalized it, the first states to do that at the ballot box. Minnesota turned down an amendment that was similar to the one that we approved here in North Carolina in May. It was the first time one of those amendments had gone down. And what we're finding in some of our early polling for the 2014 cycle is that these victories for marriage equality are likely to continue in several other states. In New Jersey, we find that voters support same-sex marriage by about a 15-point margin.
15 points?
15 points.
This is not just Democrats, this is Republicans too.
Yep. In New Jersey, for instance, and this is a huge shift from what we've seen over the years, in New Jersey, there are more Republicans who support same-sex marriage than there are Democrats opposed to it. And this has usually been something over the years where you've seen that like 100% of Republicans were opposed to it, only about 70% of Democrats were supportive of it, and that's why ban after ban passed. But in New Jersey, we're seeing that shift. Illinois voters support same-sex marriage by a 5-point margin, so that's somewhere where if there was a vote, it would probably be pretty close. Confident in New Jersey, if they had a vote, it would pass. And then one poll that we haven't released yet, but will in the next week, and I'll give you an exclusive first look. In Oregon, we find that voters there now support same-sex marriage by an 11-point margin.
Wow.
But
you know, people tend to say they're supporting gay rights until it comes to the vote. Those margins are going to shrink on an actual vote, I think. Everybody wants to do it, but when it comes to actually voting, you know, for marriage, it's kind of like the that old thing about how people tell pollsters how they think they should vote, you know?
Well, and the good thing for us with the automated polling is there's a lot less of that. There's not that sort of
it's a robot
social desirability to feel like you have to say yes. So I agree with you. For instance, when Maine had a vote on gay marriage in 2009, all the live interview polls said that gay marriage was going to pass, and we actually said, it's actually going to fail, and it did fail. But then this time around, things got better. So I do agree with you that folks who are undecided on same-sex marriage, undecided usually means no.
Breaks no.
But in both Oregon and New Jersey, the support for same-sex marriage now is at 53%. I think 53%, you have a vote, it's going to pass. Illinois is 47-42. It'd be a little dicier.
But one of the good things about the Illinois results, and again, this is at Tom's blog at publicpolicypolling.com, right?
Yeah.
Is the black vote was 60% of black people are in Illinois, your poll says, are in favor of gay marriage. And for a long time, Republicans were trying to use gay marriage as a wedge to get blacks who were considered socially more conservative away from Democrats on this issue. And you're saying it's not working there.
We've seen a big shift in public opinion on gay marriage among African Americans since President Obama came out and announced his support for it. A lot of Republicans were out there saying that Obama coming out in support of gay marriage was going to hurt his share of the black vote at the polls.
I remember that.
And obviously
really
we've now seen that didn't happen. But I will tell you the impact.
Well, maybe if they got somebody who didn't play polo on horses and ride over the heads of poor people.
But I'll tell you the
maybe
impact.
that would work.
So Obama supporting gay marriage did not cause black voters to turn against Obama, but it did cause a shift in public opinion among black voters. The shift was it made black voters more supportive of gay marriage. And we saw that in this Illinois poll this week, but where we really saw it that was important was on the vote in Maryland last month. Gay marriage passed 52-48, and African Americans split about evenly. When we had polled that...
Which is about the population.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
When we had polled that in March, African Americans were opposed to it by a 15-point margin.
So that Obama's shift is the evidence.
Gay marriage passed in Maryland because of President Obama's stance and the shift it produced among African Americans.
Let's switch over to the fiscal cliff stuff. You did an interesting poll where you asked people if they supported the Bowles-Simpson thing. How did you describe that poll?
Well,
those questions.
You see the DC pundits, the folks talking on cable in the morning, make such a big deal out of Bowles-Simpson. There were some of those folks were saying that the Bowles-Simpson was going to be the biggest issue in the presidential election. You'll hear them say things like, "The American people are dying for Bowles-Simpson." Da 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 da. My feeling, my sense from years being a pollster is that nobody knows what Bowles-Simpson is. Nobody cares about it. Da 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 da. So I thought, well, let's do a poll about Bowles-Simpson. Let's see what people think. But one thing I know is that people want to tell you that they're a little smarter than they actually are. So I thought, well, people are going to say they have an opinion about Bowles-Simpson, but they might say they have an opinion without really having an opinion about it, without really knowing what it is. So I thought, okay, Erskine Bowles, former White House chief of staff, Alan Simpson, former Republican Western senator. I thought, well, Leon Panetta is a former White House chief of staff. Conrad Burns is a former Republican Western State Senator. So we not just polled on Bowles-Simpson, we also made up a deficit reduction plan known as Panetta-Burns. And what we found was that 39...
You guys are so punk. I love this polling company. Go ahead.
What we found was that 39% of voters had an opinion about Bowles Simpson, 61% had no opinion. So that sort of confirmed my sense that, yeah, not that many people really know or care about this. But what was even more interesting was that 25% of voters had an opinion about the totally fictional Panetta Burns. So 39% an opinion on Bowles Simpson, 25% on Panetta Burns.
So it's much less.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you say like 25% less actually knew what Erskine Bowles or Bowles Simpson was?
I think less than 20% of people.
So what can you tell us? We only have a few minutes left.
Sure.
What can you tell us about what people do think about raising taxes on the rich?
People are totally supportive of raising taxes on people making over $250,000 a year. This is
So why is the U.S. House blocking that? Okay,
well,
this is what? This is what? You were saying this is...
This is just yet another issue where Republicans are really losing in the court of public opinion. Not only are we seeing strong support for those tax increases on the rich, but we're also seeing that if there is not a settlement that is reached, voters are going to blame the Republicans. Voters are not going to blame Obama. And in some sense, this is similar to what we saw in 1995 with the government shutdown, where, you know, it was Newt versus Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton, the people were with Bill Clinton, and they blamed it on Newt and the Republicans. So.
And the fiscal cliff isn't something that's immediately going to happen.
No.
And in January, there'll be more Democrats in the House. And so it makes 2 minutes? Okay, thanks. And so it makes more sense for them to wait. And this January 1st deadline is totally artificial. I'm sorry, I'm ranting. but you're saying that most people want to raise taxes on the wealthy, especially making over $250,000 a year. And that would mean letting the Bush tax cuts expire for those people. Mm-hmm. So, and that's a winner. That's a winner.
65% support for that nationally, pretty much unanimous support from Democrats, 60 to 70% support from independents, and even among Republicans, you see 25 or 30% support.
Wow.
And again,
independents, really.
Yeah,
oh.
and again, very much a strong sense that if this doesn't get done, they're blaming the Republicans.
What about entitlement reform, which is one of the things Erskine Bowles, that turd, I'm sorry, that's me, not him, is pushing, this unelected guy who's suddenly decided that cutting Social Security benefits is essential to the future of America. It's like, no, it's not.
No.
So what are you finding? Is there any support for that kind of thing among the population?
No. We've been polling some specific senators on this issue. Would you be more or less likely if they voted to cut Social Security, voted to cut Medicare, whatever? Like 15% say more likely. You'll see 55% say less likely. That is totally a political loser.
All right, we've got less than a minute here. We're talking with Tom Jensen, Public Policy Polling. The website is publicpolicypolling.com. Your Twitter handle is @PPPpolls.
Perfect.
Okay. And one last question. Paul Coble is going to be running in Wake County. Are you in 2014 for Wake County Commissioner again? You know, the king of Wake County is how he acts. How vulnerable is Paul Coble?
I think he's quite vulnerable. We found that the Wake County commissioners are very unpopular. People do not like the Republican majority on that board.
15 seconds.
So I think that if Democrats have a good candidate, they have a very good chance at sweeping the county commissioner elections as long as Democrats actually turn out to vote, which can be a problem in a midterm.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Todd.
We'll see you next week.